Good morning. I'm so glad to be with you. A little sorry that I can't be there in person, but as this is a session on the move from fantasy to reality, who's to say I'm not? The truth is, one way or another, we actually are here together, and I'm really grateful for that opportunity. Let me start by asking a question, a big question. How elastic is your narrative? In fact, how you answer that question, well, your future and the future of the world may depend on it. And if I'm exaggerating, it's only by a little. See, it turns out the stories we tell, they tell us who we are. And the stories we tell about others and the condition of the world, they frame how we live with those others and make sense of the world in which we live, the world we have to share with them. Now, it turns out that most of us are raised to tell stories of either or. It's true or it's false. It's right or it's wrong. They're brittle narratives, not elastic narratives. But imagine if we could recover or create, your choice, the ability to craft and tell and live narratives that are a little more supple, that are a little more elastic, in which we make the shift from a world that's predominantly either or to one that really is both and, without giving up 1 ounce of our personal integrity. A world in which we realize that there is no one good guy or one bad guy in any really interesting story. There is no one path to redemption or one path to damnation in any world that's interesting enough that we would want to live in. And even the notion of the shift from fantasy to reality, who would want to choose between those? We all know that a richly lived life demands fantasy and reality, and it's how we make the mix that makes us and the world interesting, and in all seriousness, a whole lot safer to live in. How often have you been somewhere, I know I have, and you hear people say, you know, it's all those Republicans' fault, and that conversation goes nowhere. Of course, go into another room in another place, and it's the same conversation with a new noun. It's all those Democrats' fault. Is it any more helpful? Of course not. Those either-ors are intellectual cul-de-sacs in which we end up losing both the best of fantasy and the best of reality. But if we can make the turn toward real both and, almost anything is possible. How do I know? Because I've lived that story over and over in my own life. One example happened on a trip to Egypt about 3.5, 4 years ago. And it turns out this trip was 5 imams, 3 ministers, and a rabbi, me, traveling to Egypt. I know, it sounds like a joke. 5 imams, 3 ministers, and a rabbi go into a bar. But we didn't go into a bar. We went to Cairo and Alexandria. And in Cairo, we got into a white van. And after a little bit of bribery and a lot of arguing, actually got permission to leave the Nile Hilton in Cairo and set out for a 2-hour drive to visit the home of a friend of mine, Hamdi, who's a leading journalist in the Muslim Brotherhood. The State Department had already told us no security would be provided. We were really on our own. We figured this was too important not to do, and so off we went. We got to Hamdi's parents' home, and his father came rushing out to greet us and hugged us, and he ran over to me and he started to hug me, and that was not expected. And Hamdi turned to his father and said, "Do you know who this is?" And he said, yes, I know. It's the Jew. It's the Jewish rabbi," as if there's any other kind, "from America." And he grabs me and he kisses me on both cheeks and walks me in to the nicest room in Hamdi's parents' home. The nicest room in the house was a 12-foot by 12-foot cinder block square with dirt floors, rugs over the dirt, and a single light bulb hanging down from the ceiling. The group gathered in that room, and Hamdi's father sat me right next to him, a place of real honor. And as everyone else is filing in around us, I look up and realize there is one more item in this room. One piece of decoration, one piece of art hanging directly opposite me. A poster pasted to the wall about this big by this big, a meter by a meter, not more. And it was a picture of Jerusalem. And floating in the clouds above Jerusalem were 2 faces, one on either side of the famous golden dome that is the Dome of the Rock. One face was the face of Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, The other face, Dr. Abdulaziz Rantisi, the spiritual founder and then leader of Hamas. And words were in between them, and I turned to a friend of mine, an imam from Alexandria, Virginia, and I said, "Can you translate those words?" And he looked at them quickly and said, "I don't think that's a good idea." And I said, "You have to translate them or I can't be here." He said, "Okay." The words say, "Take heart, Jerusalem. The dawn is breaking. Your torture is ending. Redemption is near." And he looked at me and in a moment of incredible friendship that I will never forget, said, "If you want to leave the room now, I'll walk out with you." I said, "Walk out of the room? This is why I came, to finally be in a room where someone would put that on the wall, still know who I am, and there would be room for both of us." Of course, the problem I had was those two faces. I looked at the spiritual founder and the leader of Hamas, and instead of those two faces, what I saw was the two faces of students of mine who were blown up in Hamas operations. And the feeling of hatred that welled up inside me, the longer I looked at those faces, was unbelievable. A kind of rage that I had maybe never known, and certainly not in decades, had felt. And there was an absolute truth to all of that rage and anger. But there was another feeling that marked that afternoon at Hamdi's parents' home. There was a feeling of incredible love and respect. As food was brought out by his father, and with each item he would turn to his son and ask in Arabic, who would then ask me in English, "Can the rabbi eat this? We know he too has food laws. Are we making him comfortable?" And then as the afternoon wore on, one of their local imams said, Wait. The rabbi, he has prayer hours just like we do. Never mind, they're not exactly alike. Do we have to stop for him so he can pray? And that's exactly what they did. So it turns out, in a place where I experienced a kind of rage and hate that I don't even think I knew I was capable of feeling until that moment, I felt a kind of love and respect, a kind of honesty in the exchange that happened nowhere else in a week of conversation in Egypt. Of course, the important part of that story isn't which of those emotions is right or true. They both are. It's not choosing between the tough feelings we have, the angry feelings we have, even the rage we may feel at some moments, or between the warmth and the compassion and the respect and the love we allow ourselves to find, even for people we think are dead wrong. Choosing between those is the kind of cul-de-sac, the kind of inelasticity in the narratives we tell, whether it's in our relationships with our friends and lovers or between nations, that will keep us forever at conflict and almost certainly equally forever at war. But if we can hold on to both, if we have narratives that are elastic enough to feel an ever-widening range of emotion, to see the partial truth even in the position we hate, without giving up the truths that most animate us, well, like I said, the quality of our lives and the future of the world may hang in the balance, if only we have elastic enough narratives.